factories long gone, places surrounded by irrelevant shopping malls, and this might be a place for California Space Center, so people like you, like us, can come and have a place, a destination to come integrate technologies, integrate funding. So wish me a good luck. To comment on funding, Caroline, I believe that we have to seek funding outside of the space industry if we are going to do it quickly. Like Dennis mentioned, the time is of priority. And innovation of business model again is sometimes even more of my NFTs that include also a technology from Dennis's company. We are now pursuing further qualification of using Bitcoin-based fortunes to finance high-risk, highly innovative space ventures, but also do something that attracts me, my team, and Bitcoin whales, finding a way to do something for humanity, for planet Earth, including our animals. So I want to recognize Dennis and his technology. A satellite-based project that is wounded, mutilated rhinos and elephants. And after, when we prove the technology and make it as good as possible, we will try to use it also for a location of indigenous people. Excuse me, I'm getting phone calls. I apologize for that. Also, because Africa, which was also recognized during the Bitcoin 2021 conference as the destination that people like us, space, Bitcoin, needs to embrace as the human place of injustice and huge opportunities. Africa is a perfect spaceport because of its location. So anyway, let me groom my thoughts a little bit because it's been a very quick day. The business model that I want to conclude, Copernic Space, look at it. I disclose I am a co-founder, but we are doing it for betterment of everybody. It's going to help monetize space technology, especially this one, which is not fundable through the traditional venture capital or equity fund or hedge funds. Look at this model. Okay, thank you for letting me share. Apologize if I took too much time.
No, you didn't. It was really interesting and fascinating. So
at the bottom line, take risk, think big, break the rules, look for the solution in non-standard places, and find incredible team to do it with. And Dennis's technology, his company is have a breakthrough in a satellite funding.
Dennis is amazing. So just to
and I see Sam is here. Okay, so let me just jump in. Sam is the artist, Sam Price. Rose, just if I can for a moment, Sam is the artist who contributed incredible satellite rhino art that is featured in our NFTs. And we are very appreciative of it. And if Sam would like to speak later, would be wonderful. So this was created by Lady Racket Foundation together with Saving the Survivors, with the South African organization of doctors, veterinary doctors, saving.
Dr. Lady Rocket, sorry to interrupt you. It's just that we're getting a ton of folks kind of steer back, Bagley, double down on it. So just as a quick focus, and to set up the problem in front of us and to define the problem space, I was actually looking at the technical specifications that NASA has been using for their life support systems. So whenever we talk about orbital megastructures, we always forget how exactly are we gonna make a life support system for this? How are we gonna keep people alive? And it turns out there's a lot more than just oxygen, water, food, and carbon dioxide and the waste aspects for humans. So humans on a daily basis, they produce ammonia, methane, hydrogen, carbon monoxide, acetone, methyl ethyl ketone. They produce ethane, propane, ethyl alcohol, benzenes in trace amounts. These are all trace gases humans produce. You produce this. And propyl alcohol, methyl alcohol, and butyl alcohol, ethyl acetate, ethyl benzene, hexahydrophenol, acetaldehyde, p-dioxane. You get the list. Even though it's in trace amounts, it's what causes room to become stale or have an odor. So imagine if you have a megastructure that's unable to remove the trace contaminants produced by humans. It would get stinky really quick, right? Right now, based upon our best technology, we don't actually have a way to create a closed loop system that's able to deal with these trace substances, as well as keep a closed loop going to recycle the water, to make food again from the waste products and so on, for as long as possible. Like, theoretically, even if you're assuming a small loss rate, you should be, if you start with a slight X with an X, you should be able to keep going for a decade or so, right? But it turns out it's a very difficult problem to solve, and creating a dynamic system like this is quite difficult. There have been like a number of trials on the ISS, and last night I was reading a paper on one of these, and they actually connected and hooked up algae, which would take in the CO2 and produce oxygen, with fish, and to see if they could create a closed loop system. And spoiler alert, most of the fish died. So yeah, we don't have a good track record. So any thoughts? And welcome Lex and all of the new folks who joined us on stage.
Please.
Financially.
So yes, actually, there are a few ways you can argue it. So it's not just putting someone down on the planet. You would also have to bring resources back up, or you have to cross or go to a certain planet and down its gravity well. Gravity wells cause complications, right? You could theoretically make or create an orbital megastructure from an asteroid and the resources present therein, and you could create a closed loop ecosystem around it. When it comes down to a planetary surface, building on a planetary surface, getting the mass down there safely, and then constructing something using the resources you find there, is a bit more challenging. If you notice, we have already done sample return from asteroids and comets. We haven't yet done a sample return from another planetary body. The Mars sample return mission will be the first one. So the gravity well complicates things. As long as you're not only just coming down, you're also going up. That's the inherent attraction.
So in the case of Mars, most of the resources are there. Most of the metal and ice and the water. But in the case, for example, for the moon, you need very little delta V to get away from it. So something like a rotating habitat around the moon, which is like the original logic for the Artemis mission and the Space Gateway, then it can make more sense. So it kind of looks like in the beginning you'd want somewhere to settle where you have resources there and you can use the water and make plastics and whatever you need. And then later on, as you get more advanced, it might actually become a scenario where we have a very small colony or tiny base on Mars, and it might be more based on market forces or whatever. It might be more beneficial to make a rotating habitat. But yeah, it kind of looks like you start off on the ground somewhere, and then as stuff improves and space mining improves, you can build up further out.
For a couple of years.
I might be able to chime in on this.
Sure.
Go for it, Shane.
Thank you for that question, Lex. So in a 50-year time span, I think it's fair to ask ourselves, how can we make the variables as consistent as testably possible? And one of the biggest questions that we have with space exploration right now is the variable of gravity. So the Earth's gravity, the Moon's gravity, Mars' gravity, Venus's gravity, and Europa's gravity, they're all different. However, the technology that we're developing, well, I say we royally, the technology that NASA's developing is they're aware of the variables, and they're, if I may imply that I know more than I do, which I do not, all the information that I know, which is fair enough to like gather, maybe I'll share that in a paper of some sort, but it, whatever they intend to use on the moon or Mars or Venus, they're going to try and make it so they can use it wherever they go, so that they don't have to create a new thing, create a new system, a new procedure, a new process. So, like, if we can create some sort of environment that can successfully proceed or perform its function on the ISS, and it can also do the same thing on the moon, and it can do the same thing on Mars, and the same thing on Venus, and the same thing out by Jupiter, that's probably the best product we have to work with. And we have a lot of very innovative, scientific, and especially creative folks who are working on this. And so I think that I suppose the point that I'm coming from is that the technology is aware that it has to be multifunctionary, even in multi-gravitational forces. Or perhaps I've spent too much time in small steps and giant leaps rooms today. But there's an amazing amount of content and topics that have been covered throughout the day, pretty much every day. And so it's a lot to process.
Amazing.
So,
Well, so I enter every conversation pretty much from the perspective of food. In my real life, I am a teacher, I am a public servant, and let's just say those are not rich folk. And so I'm very interested in how we improve the bottom line. The bottom line of, especially if you're thinking about wellness, food is a great place to start. And within beauty pageants, it's a bit ironic to say that you want to solve world hunger. Well, there's only one thing that could solve world hunger, and that's going to be the advancement of science. And the place that is pushing that the furthest is NASA and other space industries.
so Shane, there's actually another angle to this. If I may, Shane.
I mean, this one was pretty good, but Rose, I will hear you out, please. Thank you.
Okay, so Lex. Okay, let me put it this way. First, the asteroid belt itself is actually the remnants of creation, right? It's a planet that didn't form due to the influence of Jupiter. So what this means is that a lot of materials that would normally sink towards the core of the planet and wouldn't be abundant in the crust are just available and they're there for the picking. The second aspect is rendezvous, orbital rendezvous is far easier than landing. So if Mars doesn't have a thick enough atmosphere to do parachutes, you would have to do a propulsive landing of whatever materials you bring down there. And that is fundamentally difficult and expensive, and it is always an uncertainty, right? You would have to do a sky crane or something equivalent, or just the SpaceX propulsive landing booster thing, over and over and over again as you bring machinery and materials and equipment down. So this adds a layer of complexity to your planning process. Now, from a company standpoint, from a pure profitable standpoint, it makes more sense to be in the asteroid belt and that region and create a trajectory where you actually intersect with multiple large asteroids and slowly mine them out over the years and process the material and send it back, than it is to try and extract these resources on Mars, then either process them and send them back to Earth, because that doesn't work once you go up, once you're inside the gravity well. The other aspect of this is that water ice is also plentiful in asteroids, and we can use this fact to start making a lot of fuel quite quickly. So this is also true for Mars, so you can argue this either way, and that's a flaw in my argument. but we don't have the water ice constraints. Like that would be one thing going for Mars, but that's not the case here either. And beyond that, it is simply more mass efficient to construct something, a habitat like this, than try to settle a planet or try to populate a planet. And my last argument would actually be dust. Lunar dust is a bitch. Like, it is sharp, it's sticky, and like Anakin would say, it gets everywhere, and it's like the worst possible kind of sand. If you breathe that in, and if you keep bringing it back into the modules, you will start getting a population of with asbestos quite quick. Even though Mars has wind and some weathering processes, so does the Moon to a certain degree, but that's separate. It is that process is simply not enough to smooth out the dust as compared to Earth. So this dust problem can be more readily dealt with when it comes to asteroids and like mining them out than planetary surface.
Planets
Well,
is more inspiring to
I mean,
me, but
from a
I
first
strongly agree with
principles.
that.
Oh, sorry. Sorry,
However,
go ahead.
I'd say we also, so usually I'm like sci-fi great, sci-fi good, love sci-fi. That's what inspires our intrigue to explore these kind of further out ideas. However, we have received some media where, goodness, I'm not the most caught up on movies and sci-fi. And so there is The Expanse. A lot of people reference The Expanse, and so uh, I haven't watched all of it, so I can't really speak fully on it. But what I do recognize is that what they do depict in that series is a defined divide between the nodes within our solar system. If we're mindful of that, there does not have to be divides. Like if we're figuring out how to serve the bottom line, improve like the basic of what everyone deserves, I, that I think is less divisive, and we will find less wedges in our societal ambitions. But I don't want to be too preachy or like overarching. But with when sci-fi is in the mix, we have to analyze it with perhaps some objective criticism, or like in a good way, as like a warning. Like a lot of media that's put out to us is in ways a warning of what could be if we don't act right now. That's
what
fine,
does
that's
sci-fi
fair,
have to
and
do with
that's what I
anything?
would say based off the premise of your question.
Okay, from a first principles perspective, it when you look at the asteroid belt from a first principles perspective, it does make more sense to colonize that or do something like that. So, for example, just if you factor in the payload for Starship, at least it has about like 1,000 tons of fuel. So then let's say what would 1,000 tons of a space mineral would be? Let's say you find enough platinum, and that's about $40, $36 a gram. So that means it's about $40,000 a kilogram, 40 million a ton, and 40 billion for 1,000 tons. So once that mechanism gets going, I think the whole space mining thing will catch everybody by surprise because there is just so much uh, money to be made and traded. So even when you factor in shocks to the market from bringing in that amount of material, so let's say you can't make 40 billion out of one payload of Starship. Maybe it's like 10. So yeah, once that mechanism gets going, that will be extremely more powerful than I think any colony. And I feel like if when you do the calculations on that, yeah, you do have a point there. Like, why aren't people talking about the entire asteroid? I guess it's just not as exciting. Nobody wants to live on an asteroid. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, and there's a lot of newer technologies as well. So, for example, we have one person here, George. I don't know if he's in the room, but he was working at JPL on space tethers. And this is a newer propulsion technology, which is just a solid state propulsion. You just let out a wire, and then as you're crossing a planet's magnetic field, that wire can generate a current, and the way you route that current, you can go back and forth on the magnetic field. So that only gives you a little bit of propulsion on Earth, but on something like Jupiter, you could capture possibly an entire asteroid for a super cheap amount this way. And yeah, so on a first principles basis, we have so many unexplored options when it comes to that. So I am hopeful that it'll catch us by surprise and we'll forget about all the past failures that we've had in space mining.
Lex, have you ever read the Culture series by Ian M. Banks?
To read a list of books, one of which is catching up.
So you don't have to read them in order as they're anthological. I would highly recommend Look to Windward. Have you tried that one out?
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're saying to go to which?
Look to Windward. It's actually one of the best and purest ones, and it gives one of the best arguments for living in an orbital and gives you a real feel of what it would be like to live on a God's bracelet. You know, I just love that.
God's bracelet.
Yes,
That's
God's
a good line.
bracelet.
That's beautiful.
Don't you love it?
Yeah. Okay, now you gave me a reason to jump to that one. So you're saying you could just skip around the different parts of the Culture series?
Yes, they're all anthological, but the latter ones actually play around with the narrative a lot more. They use a lot of creative liberties, and he starts getting really creative with his narrative structures as the series goes on. But they're all anthological. Each one is separate. Each one has a different cast.
And Lex, I actually have a quick question for you. So it's in regards to how artificial intelligence can help with the scale necessary for the construction of megastructures. So when I look at how many modern buildings are constructed, at one time an architect had to focus on every minute detail that went into the construction. And not to say that they still don't, but like now with a lot of software that's available, as long as there's an understanding of parameters, the rooms that are being constructed, what's happening behind the walls, of the room can, to largely a degree, be automated. So what type of parameters do you think would be important for artificial intelligence to tackle the scalability of something like this, building something large in space? What would be important metrics for the AI to consider what that might look like in the construction process? And could AI participate in any way with the design phase?
So the question is not about building, it's about accumulation of resources. So for building, I think it's almost like 3D printing. Obviously, I'm kind of more of like what kind of robots we need to have out in space. It feels like
I can help you with that.
They are just as much of they need just as much of percussive maintenance as they do on Earth. They just need a loving tap now and then to keep going. Most people don't know this, but the space station once had like these thin film, cutting edge solar panels that were being deployed, and they managed to rip themselves. And the astronauts fixed it with a toothbrush. That happened.
That's awesome. There's like duct tape. It's always gonna duct tape somehow is gonna be involved. Velcro, yeah, for sure.
And tape measure, if I could. They're using tape measures in cheap satellites for as an antenna. So they just wrap it around and then keep a little. I think Dennis told me about this. Yeah, and then they keep a little fishing line to hold the measuring tape together, and then a little electrical thing melts the fishing line, and the measuring tape flips out of the CubeSat, and it becomes an antenna. And I think also another company is using hard drive motors as reaction wheels. People are coming up with some pretty interesting ideas.
And
Scott?
Jeremy, before you have a chance to weigh in on this, I just want to do a quick reset. We have quite a few listeners in the room right now. You are all in Small Steps and Giant Leaps. Small Steps and Giant Leaps is the largest space club here on Clubhouse. We have regularly weekly discussions on a variety of topics. Right now, you're in building orbital megastructures. A little bit earlier today, we had a discussion on law in space, and even earlier, some discussion on science fiction. During other days of the week, it could be on how different countries are tackling their space programs, which is a field that we're looking for more perspectives from around the world on. It's very important that we consider every country in this. But if any of the topics are interesting, hit that greenhouse that's above my head and follow the club. You'll have access to a great deal of professionals and fans alike. We aren't just engineers. We aren't just scientists. I'm an author myself, so I'm surrounding myself by people who are absolutely amazing to listen to, and we also encourage you to join in the conversation. And while there are some hands raised, there is one caveat for raising the hand, and we do ask that you please fill out your profile, and that includes any social media details. Before raising your hand, we would like to know who you are before bringing you up on the stage. It's just a way to prevent any trolls. So, Jeremy, please weigh in on the perspective of how robots in space can help build megastructures.
Why, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Lex, first of all, I'd love to talk to you sometime. We're doing some pretty neat little things with AI and our little orbital robots, or like we call them, Orbots. This is kind of a really neat moment because we're actually doing a press release right now with Orbital Assemblies, which is doing the D-Star mission here in the next couple of, I want to say 2023 is when it's scheduled, and we're providing the orbital robots, Rogue Space Systems, my company. We're providing those orbital robots to do the observation and potentially even some of the construction work on their demonstration mission up there. There's a lot of challenges that AI can help us with, everything from predictive movements because of communication delays, or assisting with communication delays and continuing robotic movements, detection of anomalies within signals. I mean, there's just tons of little things that we're using AI for. Now, I am not the expert in AI. I have a team that kind of handles that stuff for me. But artificial intelligence is going to have a huge it's going to have a huge part in with robotics in space because we have so many different challenges. Everything from radiation to communication delays, human reaction time, the whole bit. So the role of robotics as far as large structures are concerned, we have the ability to assemble and build in space manufacturing using heavier robotics, transport, like what we're doing here in a couple of years for orbital assembly. We're going to be, doing the inspection and observation, doing hyperspectral analysis on their trusses, and making sure things are not being stressed too much, things like that. It's bleeding edge. It's right out there with some of the most advanced capabilities that are out in space, because humans can't do every single thing. It's space. I don't know if you noticed, but space is kind of dangerous, especially for humans. So what we want to try and do is enable and extend human capability into space so that we can operate and build these structures that will be safe for humans to use. Um, this is what our goals are with respect to Rogue and what we're trying to accomplish. If you want to know more about us, I ask you guys go to the website, check us out. We got a little YouTube channel, and always happy to answer some questions. But yeah, that's just kind of my take. But robots are definitely the future in space.
There's another cool company too, for anyone who's not familiar, called Made in Space that does robotic assembly, and they've figured out how to do 3D printing in zero gravity, which blows my mind. So that's another cool one to look into.
Yeah, we were actually going to work with them to do something. I can't remember what it was, but their printer was just a little too small. That was the thing. That was the only problem with it. But it's super cool technology.
I always
I
Lex,
structures.
could you get closer to your mic?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Lex.
All right, it's Android. Sorry, I'm gonna be quiet and listen.
No, you're good now. You're good now.
No, you're
You're back.
perfect
God
now.
damn
You're
it.
coming farther.
Hey, just let
Listen,
him chill
okay.
for a second, guys.
It always works on iPhone and on Android. Thank this.
A quick thought or a opinion. Can
Yes, epic. Thank you so much for being patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stage, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Yeah. So instead of building a mega orbital structures in the other planet or on the asteroid, isn't it better that we expand the space station and make it suitable for living for the normal people? Like I know it's a bit of a ideal condition, but there is a possibility, right?
Well, the space station is getting pretty old. A lot of it is like the space station oh my gosh, sorry. The space station is about like 30 years old, and the planned funding goes until I think 2028 around right now, but I think it's going to be obsolete eventually, so it's going to be a lot better to build a new space station. I believe Axiom Space,
Or
a
renovate the old
company.
space station itself. Isn't that
Yes.
much better?
So,
No,
Even the
that'd be
cost of the living is also, I mean, funding is also a bit less when you're renovating, and it'll be much more better when you expand it so that everybody can go and to the space station instead of building a big orbital structure. I mean, mega structures in the orbital space.
so
Well, another consideration with space station too, and for any engineers who are out there, and Krian, I saw that you just entered the room as well, so you might have an answer on this too. I'm not sure if the space station was necessarily built with rotational habitats in mind. Like when I think about the design of it, because I know that would require a
It was
different type
not.
of engineering structure.
It was not. It was not designed with that in mind. The closest thing that was designed to have in mind was a centrifuge, and even the small centrifuge for doing plant and animal studies has turned into a huge bureaucratic nightmare. And I'm not even sure it's up there after 25 years or however long this station's been up there.
So, there's
Yeah, orbital assemblies is actually a rotational. It's a rotational space station. That's precisely what their demonstration is going to be in 2023. Is demonstrate the capability of generating gravity on a rotating structure.
yeah, I believe it's going to be equivalent to Mars gravity. Is that correct?
I think so. Just shameless plug. I'm actually going to be in Los Angeles at their ground demonstration for their what they term their D Star on Saturday. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I'm going to learn a lot more about it. And I kind of need to since we are providing the robotics for it. But with all that being said, I'll be in LA checking that stuff out. But I want to say that you are correct. I want to say it's supposed to generate right around what Mars gravity is supposed to be.
so just to quickly add in here. So the station, the Zarya module, which was the first one, isn't quite up to specifications. So the problem isn't just the stresses and the orbital stresses of these materials. So imagine this: these materials, thermocycle repeatedly, right? They get cold when they're in the night side, and then they expand once they come back into the light. Cold, hot, cold, hot. So they're expanding and contracting all the time. And this starts creating stresses inside the material, which are fairly unique and they have to be dealt with. So most of the American modules are actually, as well as JAXA and ESA. Has ESA contributed? I don't remember, but I think they did.
Yes, they have.
Yeah. So the ESA and JAXA modules, they're all extremely well designed. However, and this will get me killed for saying this, but Roscosmos's module isn't, like, their life support system. The Electron keeps breaking down. It keeps breaking down. It's worse than an old car, right? It breaks down every other year. There's a catastrophic failure, quote unquote, of their life support module, which is a big deal, and they keep mooching off of the ECLSS, which is the backup system / other system that they have on the station, as well as their backup as well. So the Russian side of it might not last, but even then, given the amount of thermal cycling that's been going on with the materials, we would see catastrophic failure if you try to expand it too much.
Allow me to say like a short comment on that. As I'm familiar with the Russian space program, nothing particularly wrong with structural design of both Zarya and Zvezda modules. The major problem is they're really old and they have exceeded the design lifetime already. So the same problem with thermal cycling is true for both JAXA, ESA and American modules. It's just slightly newer and haven't hit the structural limits. And there's nothing wrong with Russian design. It's just being old and beaten to the point where it starts to fail. If anything, they are performing exactly as they're designed for. And furthermore, the Russian space engineering design for the space station has a long legacy of both Mir and Salute. So again, I want to highlight that I'm not a fan of Roscosmos as it is today, but there is no design problems with the Russian space segment, just hitting the limit of its design lifetime. And the second thing, they are which is Roscosmos to blame for, they managed to hit the Zvezda module pretty hard during one of the docking attempts, and that basically didn't help with the crack propagation. It's not likely that the module will explode just randomly in space. However, the point is to follow on what to do with the space station, International Space Station, beyond its design lifetime, be it 2024 or 2028. What I'm thinking is a good idea for any space startup or bigger space company is try to recycle the structure of International Space Station in orbit instead
Isn't
of the
that exactly what Axiom is planning on doing? I know they're planning on adding several modules.
I believe Axiom plans to dock the orbital segment to ISS first and then undock it as independent space station after ISS lifetime is over. But going to the recycling part and going to the orbital megastructures, a company that's able to successfully recycle the structure of International Space Station in space will make the first step towards, building that technology stack required for building, bigger and, more sophisticated megastructures.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've heard several companies discussing repurposing the old space station once it's decommissioned. Kyler, thanks for being so patient. You have the stage. It appears that Kyler is not here, so William, you can go.
Hi. Yeah, so one thing I want to point out is, we've talked a lot about artificial intelligence designing a lot of these structures and everything.
Sorry to quickly butt in. We have a few Williams on stage. We mean William Andresen.
Sorry.
My bad.
Hey everyone, I'm just here to listen, and it's good to see you back on the app, Lex, and good to see you, Creon, again. But just here to listen. Thank you for the conversation and giving me the opportunity.
And we don't want anyone to think that we're being harsh up here with the speakers. We're going in what is called PTR order. It's pull to refresh order. It's just a way that we're keeping track. So don't worry, Will. We will absolutely get to you. Zen, welcome up to the stage.
Hey, thanks, guys. Great conversation. Wanted to quickly go back to the previous points that you guys were making about whether we either go to Mars and set up shop there, or we have these orbital megastructures here. And I was wondering why you guys are talking about that like it's binary. Somebody touched on the ways you would finance each project, and to me they're completely different things, right? One would be maybe something that you'd go and vacation and utilize the earth for resources and resupply missions, whereas the other one would have to be self-sustaining if it's in Mars or elsewhere. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Zen, I would agree. It's not a binary thing. We're gonna have orbital structures. We're gonna have structures at the Lagrange points. We'll have structures around the moon. We're gonna have bases on the moon. We'll have bases on Mars. We'll have structures around Mars. I mean, it's certainly, definitely not binary, in my very humble opinion. I think it's all stages. I think it's going to be iterative. I think, we're going to see all of these things, all of these structures, all of these capabilities are going to be progressing kind of in parallel, and they're going to leapfrog one another. So I totally agree with you. It's certainly not binary. They each have their use cases. They each have their specific capabilities and advantages. And it's going to be really cool over the next few years to watch some of these things actually come to fruition. So, yeah.
Definitely, that's a really good point. Famita, would you like to add anything?
Would it be possible for me to go next? I've been here probably
yeah, you were here and you just ended up back. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rose. I originally came in because I saw Lady Rocket was on, but that it seems like she's left. But I just had a couple questions. The first of which is, what in your mind is the resource that whose lack thereof makes the development of this infrastructure the most difficult? And the second of which is, how do you see the progression of capitalistic infrastructure in space? Do you see, or I mean, like the average person visiting space, do you see it originating with hotels and initiatives like what SpaceX is doing? Do you see like a kind of different trajectory for this kind of initiation? So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And I'd also like to say, recognize Lex. Your conversations with Andrew Huberman have had a pretty big impact on the direction that I've taken my BFA thesis. So I look forward to hearing your next conversation with him.
Okay, the blockchain thing comes up a lot, and I just like to say that, first of all, we don't even have regular internet in space. There is the deep space network, so even your internet packets don't work the same way. Second, it's like you have to use the right tool and the most efficient one for the job. So, for example, on Earth, all the crypto and blockchain algorithms are really useful for decentralization, but in space, they're just super slow and not very energy efficient. And even companies like Coinbase, for example, on their internal operations, they don't even use blockchain. They use a Redis cache or a regular database. So that's the
Yeah,
problem with it. We're gonna
I
need
need to cut in. I need to cut in here just for a
some
moment.
different
I'm not
kind
going
of.
to know. I don't know what Coinbase does internally and whether and the blockchain stuff. But believe me, there's plenty of internet in space. There are thousands of internet nodes in space, and some of them are quite fast. Thousands. Okay, and there's internet to the space station. and there's internet to hundreds and thousands of satellites. Our company has flown more than 500 satellites. They all have high-speed internet connections, bi-directional to the ground. We're sending packets back and forth all the time. So, yeah, don't. There's a lot of people here talking about stuff. Quite frankly, like colonies at Lagrange points, and it's all going to happen in the next few years, and that's just fantasy, unfortunately.
Oh, so just to quickly clarify, I believe when we're talking about internet in space, we're not talking about low Earth orbit because that's covered by the TDRSS and stuff. We're talking, so this, I heartily blame George Lee, who is doing amazing work on this. We're talking about the delayed networking between or at planetary distances, right? How do you make a delay tolerant network that works between Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, and all of these different places? As far as I know, the deep space network still operates on a very different paradigm, and networking these nodes together in a protocol is really difficult. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
No, you're 100% correct, Rose, and it is very, very difficult. But Cran, I want to make sure I'm very clear about something, and in case I was misunderstood, I have there. Let there be no illusion. These megastructures are not taking place within the next few years. Okay, this is all 7, 10, 20, 30 years out. None of this stuff is going to happen quickly. It's not going to happen anytime like super fast or soon. There are companies that are doing demonstrations and they would like to build these larger structures in the coming years, but none of this stuff is happening overnight. So just a point of clarification. I wasn't trying to suggest these things were getting built that quick. But yeah, communication in space sucks. Yeah, that's a simple way of putting it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeremy. Famida, are you there?
Hey, I am here, but my daughter woke up, so I'll be back.
No worries, no worries. Jean-Frederic, do you want to go?
Yeah, hi, thanks. And this was a little while ago. Somebody was asking about AI influencing the design of these things, or how it could influence the design of megastructures and the architecture of same. I'm an architect in Florida. Architecture has just managed to latch on to AI just a little bit, and only a few companies do. Thanks largely to, for example, Autodesk's iterative design methodology and so on, and they've got a pretty good visual of AI influencing the design of their own office and all the inputs that you need to provide to get that to happen. So the question was about what kind of inputs are you using to allow AI to help, I guess. And if we look at megastructures on Earth, because I mean we've been doing it for a little while, we only just started actually researching these parameters, and there's lots of them, and most of them have to do with the human component, relationships to the visuals, the wayfinding, the relationship to your environment, and I was wondering if anybody is really starting to investigate that. The thing that we've found in using AI to design space is that it starts looking very much not like something that a person would have designed. And a lot of the results start seeming weirdly organic. And especially when you're designing robots or drones or so on and so forth with AI and trying to hyper economize, structures and so on, they start mimicking organic forms. So you wind up with drones that look like a human pelvis or something like that, because those are the kind of shapes that manage those forces the best. What kind of structures are we going to start looking like, and how different are they going to look than what we've seen in 2001 Space Odyssey, when everything is hub and spoke and wheels? how weird is it's going to get when we start unleashing AI to design structures and get to see the shapes that it comes up with, given that these shapes are going to be manufactured in space and not in a gravity well?
That's a fantastic question. Would anyone like to weigh in on that?
So it's not even as much as shape. I actually worked with a few companies that were trying to bring parametric design to architecture. So think about taking cellular automata and or something, or just even something similar, like even just an agent-based simulation or something, and you're trying to model different parts of the building, how they respond to different events and stuff, and you try to build it out logically. And most architects just didn't see the utility in it. They didn't even see the utility in the idea of, hey, what if you could simulate very much like the sim style little people and their needs, etc., and do this randomized thing about how they would queue or what would happen, how the building would change with temperature, etc. And most of the industry rejected that. So it is, the technology for this has been around for a while. Like, think about modeling each discrete subsystem as a node, and like if you're familiar with automata, and each one is related to each other. So like temperature is related to different parameters, and you can start seeing how interactions come out of that. So even that kind of modeling hasn't really been done, and it's a wide open field. I am talking a bit out of my butt here because this is not my field of expertise. If anyone is an expert on this, I would appreciate you jumping in. So, thank you.
I'd like
Well,
to know if we have anybody in the Orbital Megastructures room here who's actually built a megastructure on the Earth, because it's a bunch of software engineers and like robotics people and rocket people talking about that's basically architecture and construction, for which most of us are talking out of our butts, I think, frankly.
Well, how
Well,
real
and
is an
and
idea?
Rose, that's exactly right, because talking out of our butts in architecture is exactly what we do, because architects are experts in nothing, and we are the synthesists, if that's a word. We're the fat spider in the middle of the web, listening to a bunch of engineers explaining what needs to be done, and then trying to translate that into something that can be built by humans. And that's where you're going to differ in when somebody builds a 3D printer that Jeremy thinks is big enough. And you're going to be able to actually build your design because you'll be able to feed your design to something that can build anything. And at that point, it's going to look very, very, very different. And so today, the psychological component of what a design looks like is a large part of what we do. Because, for example, you could build a really, really slender column and everybody would freak out in that space because they couldn't imagine that such a thin thing could support the structure, for example. And you would create psychological stress in anybody in the room. So sometimes you have to build something to look like what it does. But you might not confront that constraint. Yeah, go ahead.
Whoa, that sounds really interesting. So, like, what's the process with it, though?
The process with,
like, how it functions.
Well, that's the thing is, I'm constantly confronted with, it's an extremely iterative process, which is what which is what this iterative design does. Now I can feed a bunch of design parameters to an AI, and it's going to spit out 15,000 options that iteratively hone in on the right design. This is not going to look like anything that a person imagined. A person is going to imagine right angles and space layouts that look like things that we know, and they're not going to start creating spaces that have walls that are angled at bizarre degrees and so on, and fractions of whatever, or that are even curved or so on, because somebody has to build that, and it's just going to be economically unfeasible.
I mean,
I'm a big fan of
oh yeah,
Are
Sarah,
you
please go ahead.
Are
Oh,
you
I
going to
was
be
just
one of
saying.
the? Are you going to be one of the
Sarah,
builders?
please go ahead.
Excuse
Excuse
me.
me, please let Sarah speak.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go, yeah. Wait.
Oh, I
So,
was just saying I'm a big fan of biomimicry, and that's what well, at least what I'm focusing on with stellar amenities. I'm not a space architecture specialist, but my boss is, so I'm hoping that we get to see more organic designs like that.
So, yeah, and that's exactly what I'm honing in on because I just was in a junk store the other day and I found a set of plans of the Starship Enterprise. And you can find them on eBay and so on and so forth. Somebody actually created like 12 drawing sheets of design drawings of the Enterprise, and every single flippin' space is in there. But it is a 100%. The Enterprise is built in space, right? We've seen that visual. It's never been designed to land. But of course, at the time, people are going to design it following, perfect arcs and so on. But when we feed the design for and I think one of them was the bulkhead of an Airbus or something like that, the structural web inside the bulkhead of an Airbus, and try to optimize it for weight, and this, iterative design process wound up with something that looked completely alien. I got the feeling that we're going to once we start building ships in space, they're going to look more like what the Klingons cooked up than what we would.
Or the Borg.
So there's a
The
couple.
Borgs had a cube. I don't know why. Why a cube? Seriously.
And when was this? When was this like created? Like, how long ago were these designs made?
1972. Well, I mean, of course, the drawings are from 72, but the Enterprise is like from 1963 or whatever.
Oh, okay. Are there current plans to build like a pyramid in space or something like these forms? Like,
I don't see why you would.
or like a big space station at the moon? Like they've done it in space, but I don't know if they would build like a space station on the moon. You know what I mean? Like with the
Well, that they are
orbital
planning on that. The
structure.
Lunar Gateway project is part of the Artemis mission.
I can confirm that.
I'm going to volunteer to try and get one of the either the CTO or chief scientist from Orbital Assemblies, who's literally designing a megastructure to try and be here on the next building megastructures event. I'm pretty positive I can get them to come on. This way we got some
If they can
real
post some drawings,
expertise.
yeah, if they could post some drawings as well, that would be spectacular.
So a couple of things happen when we start talking about these types of structures, which is very interesting. For starters, a lot of the reason humans design the way we do is because we have limitations in the way things are made. And sometimes that means that like the machinery or processes that we use to make things, but sometimes it comes down to like what's available in bulk, right? So why are buildings squarish? Well, it's because we mass manufacture flat panels. You know, we don't make exotic shapes custom for every little thing. But one of the things that's interesting is as we scale up to orbital megastructure scale projects, in theory, you could take those standard structure shapes that you get from, off the shelf, and you could combine them at such a scale that you can still afford the kind of organic shape nuance that you guys are talking about here.
I
Yeah,
think that's
like
actually totally right. I use this iterative design process. It's called generative design. If you pull the refresh, you can see a picture I have of a design I did recently. And actually, I've thought of exactly that concept before. That's a really good idea, Michael, is, like aluminum extrusions, they make scientific experiments with it. It's just a simple aluminum shape. It's like a 2x4, but made of aluminum. And then you could use generative design to make structures based off of those off-the-shelf components. I think that's actually a great idea because you'll get the benefits of both worlds.
it's kind of like
Zaha Hadid in space. Oh my God, it's going to be amazing.
it's kind of like what you see with both 3D printing and what's the other one? I forget the other example was, where basically you build something larger out of really small elements, or sorry, the other example is composite materials, where it's made of, billions, if not trillions, of tiny, almost microscopic carbon fibers. But instead, you're talking about tremendous scales of things that we can mass manufacture, but are relatively large compared to the human experience.
Yeah, even just using Lego, you could have the algorithms use Lego to assemble these organic structures from the stock block.
The best part is, in gravity, you could probably do that.
I'd like to jump
Jim
in for
Caravella in
the.
a sorry,
Tara, could
Jeremy.
you, wait. Let's just. So we have a ton of speakers here.
Sorry, go
Let's
ahead.
just set up the speaking order. So Tara, could you please go ahead?
Oh, sure, thank you. I was just listening, I just recently come in. And I would like to just add on John's. I think that just by name itself, if we're building it in the orbital space, it's of course it's much more different than we're building on Earth. Besides what we use as a material technology, there will be a huge problem or a huge learning process of how we're actually gonna build it. What is the process, right? What type of project management we're gonna choose in it? It is not like we are building a 100-story building on Earth. It's different. It's a predictive style of project. The problem with that is for Mega, there will a lot more engineering side behind it that calculate, and there much more architectural side is already should be already decided, and calculation should be accurate. But because of the environment that we going to build it, it's unpredictable, agile style. However, in agile, it's iterative. It's you start with where you a project, or you add on. It's in an incremental way. So my thinking is, even though it's a mega project, so we add on agile style, which means iterative and incremental or hybrid. And when we add those two style of a process, the project can actually move forward, and it will be can come back to fix it. So that's my vision to, if you would build a mega structure, the way to build it, the thought process will be combined predictive and the agile project. So that will actually solve a lot of unknown. We're gonna buy it, we're gonna build this one, that's our architecture design, that's engineer calculated. We're gonna go only with this style. We cannot do that. So that's my add-on. Thank you. I'm complete speaking.
Thank you for that, Tara. That was really insightful. I'd like to quickly just reset the room, as we've been going for almost 2 hours now. You're in the Orbital Megastructures room in the Small Steps and Giant Leaps Club. Be sure, if you're enjoying the discussion, to hit the greenhouse at the top and join the club. We'd love to have you. If you'd like to come up to the stage and ask a question, bring up a topic, or just join the discussion, please raise your hand. And going back to PTR order, Pete, you have the stage. If Pete is not here right now, we can go to Ryan.
Yeah, hi. Really interesting conversation. Just a few thoughts I had, and I'll quickly go through the early ones because were older conversations, especially with regards to the idea of internet in space, or having internet in space. It almost seems as though it kind of maybe a slightly less optimal way of phrasing the problem, because it implies that by fact of just being in space, it's space itself which is causing the issue, where it may not necessarily be that. It may be distance. So not necessarily space in internet in space is difficult, but internet across large distances is difficult. And then that presents potential solutions around that or workarounds, such as, I don't know, having localized internet networks, i.e., ours here on Earth, and then Mars having its own infrastructure there, and then kind of the essential communication back and forth could be scheduled and having various different kind of areas of kind of networks. Just a quick point there, and coming back to the megastructures question, I think going off the point of how we build these structures and the assumptions we make from our experience here on Earth, essentially. I'm just thinking about the progression, and this kind of ties into what Frederick said and Tara, just in terms of how we actually get to the point of building a megastructure. Is it going to be a gradually iterative process of us adding to the same structure until it reaches the size that you could call it a megastructure? Or will it be just a one-stop thing where, okay, now we reach the technological level to be able to build a megastructure, and then we just go and build it? That's the project itself, kind of just jumping over those steps, or at least waiting for that progression. And I think those methods will definitely affect how we approach the problem, and kind of looking at what Tara said in terms of the agile approach. I think if we're going to start looking at different approaches, there's a big consideration to be had when you're building in space, because there's essentially almost no margin for error in some of the systems that are being built, because of the risks of what space presents. So the agile approach, I think, works well on Earth, or at least within systems where you can just do that. However, when you're in space, and it's very different when you're dealing with critical systems where any point of failure presents potential death, to everyone there. So I think, in terms of how we get to the point of getting to a megastructure, I think what's highly likely is that it will essentially be a progression of what we have with the International Space Station and how that's expanded. Doesn't necessarily have to go directly off the back of that, but another alternative, more updated space station. And it will be a case of, we have needs currently in space, and the space station we have will serve that, and those needs will grow, and the structure itself will grow, and it may be that we eventually reach the point of calling it a megastructure through expansion of our missions, as opposed to the jump
Brian,
start. Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I don't understand where you're going. Like, could you make it down for me? Explain like I'm 5, because I'm kind of dumb.
I mean, he did ask the question for how to have internet in space, and I just want to quickly say the main difficulty is not so much the distance, is the pointing accuracy or whatever satellite or antenna or even laser beam you're going to shoot. And in order to have that kind of accuracy over that large of distance, you need a very expensive and bulky atomic clock that can give you enough accuracy to do the pointing.
No, that's not true either. I'm sorry.
That
I do this
is,
stuff all day long.
I mean,
You
we
know, because
literally
we don't.
had the people from JPL.
Well, all right. Maybe it's true if you're going to point into deep space, but the beams are relatively wide. We've taken lasers. We've sent 600 megabits back from the moon with lasers. We didn't have atomic clocks on the moon to do this. So we did this with standard telescopes on the Earth and a small telescope and a fairly powerful small laser on the Laddie satellite that went to the moon. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say.
Well, I guess
Some
it depends on the
there's a lot of
size of
hard
the
there's a
orbit,
lot.
right?
So, Creon, and this is my question. My understanding was that the issue is basically the inverse square law. No matter how powerful or positionally accurate your antenna is, as soon as you point it to something far away enough, the amount of photons you actually get at the end are a fraction of what you send. So the farther away you are, the fewer photons you'll get. So the more photons you have to send, or the bigger the receiver has to be. Is
Oh
my
yeah, sure. And your data rates, for a given constant frequency or wavelength, your data rates do decrease as you get farther away, unless you make your ground antennas correspondingly bigger or your ground telescopes correspondingly bigger. This is all called link budget analysis, and it's what communications engineers do every day for space systems. And you kind of get what you pay for. And since you can only take a certain amount of size and mass into space, a lot of times you end up paying for it on the Earth with bigger systems.
So where so the so okay, how do we synchronize all of these points in space, right? I think that's where Nisten's atomic clock thing was coming in, I guess.
Well, we have atomic clocks on Earth, and we have GPS, which we can use in low Earth orbit. We don't have anything like that for deep space. So for deep space, what we do is we use we use two-way communication. We use Doppler, we use round trip timing, and things like that, and we use phase locking, and we try and keep very accurate track of the positions and velocities of these objects in deep space. But we do it with phase locking and Doppler, and you have to do it with multiple frequencies of radio because you get delays through the ionosphere that affect different frequencies differently. And that's the deep space net. That's some of the science of the deep space network, is how to precisely lock and get distance and velocity constantly to an object that you're talking with, especially as the Earth is rotating and antennas are going in and out of visibility. But it's yeah. But as I mentioned, we had 600 megabits consistently from the moon with LADI, and that had a 1 watt laser on board.
That's it. That's really interesting. So, okay, just to pull back a little bit into the discussion space, if we are going on PTR order, and we'll get to the mods as well, I believe we read Ryan. Will Spagnoli is next. Will, you're finally the right Will.
Hey guys, so one thing I wanted to point out, I'm coming in from a very different angle of this. I think something that's been overlooked a decent bit is we're looking at the challenge of how do we build these orbital megastructures from the current limitations of what alloys do we know, what materials do we have, what is bulk available, etc. But I think when you look at the advancements in technology, especially with artificial intelligence, so me personally, my company does AI drug design, right? And so we do targeted molecular design. Currently, we're focused on, COVID, cancer, all of that. But we built into the software intentionally to go far beyond that and get into creating new alloys, creating different stuff. The whole point is that it is a goal-oriented AI design process for molecules. So beyond pharmaceuticals and such, it's in the same way that you might need, say a low molecular weight, it to have a chemical interaction with this, whatever, all of these different parameters, you can do that same concept with the exact same algorithm and put it at, I know we were talking about the thermodynamic problems of the hot and cold causing degradation to the space stations. And we were also talking about like the strength at which would be needed. Well, all of that in molecular design, you could target something that can be easily synthesized, something that can be very, able to handle wide temperature changes, much stronger alloys, different stuff like that. And I think that's something that's been overlooked is we can't look at what we're going to do in the future with today's current limitations because at the same speed that space science is developing, so is molecular science and material science. And I think that there will be a lot more options of things that we find new molecule. I mean, if there is essentially, if there was every single atom in the universe was a molecule, humanity has currently discovered about 1 drop of water. So we have barely even seen the capabilities of the molecular space. And artificial intelligence is the first thing that is taking us beyond that and letting us start to design things intentionally and get outside of what we see on Earth. And that makes a very big difference in our design structures. I mean, if we are going to be, by the time that we are building these megastructures, having metal alloys that are 10 times as strong or 10 times as heat resistant, those are things that have to be factored into the design process. So I would love to hear from some of the people in here that work on those, orbital structures and everything. And what are y'all's opinions on that subject?
Wow, that's really fascinating. Would anyone like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll weigh in because I have to actually leave shortly. Sorry, I'm taking off on a plane. I mean, this is science fiction, man. Just postulating some metal or some alloy that's 10 times as stronger or 10 times as heat conductive as something that exists. I mean, thousands of scientists and engineers have been toiling away on this stuff with the most advanced tools for their whole careers. And we occasionally get advances, in a factor of 20%, 50%. Frankly, the thermal stuff that's really interesting is not new molecules. I think we kind of know the molecular thermal properties of most things, especially now that we've got. I mean, we know diamond. Like, if we could build stuff out of diamond, it would be fantastic. It would be thermally great. Like, diamond is the ultimate in many ways. And we sort of have now these new forms of carbon, which may go partway there, nanotubes and that sort of thing, maybe, if we can make them in bulk quantities. But the things that are really exciting are the sort of mesostructures, like where you run heat pipe, like porous structures with fluids inside them. Now we're talking thermally really interesting stuff. But I mean, just postulating, saying that AI is going to make alloys that are 10 times as strong. That's I'd like to hear you back that up. I don't mean to be too harsh, but I'd love to know about it. Like, where is it?
I would agree with
So
that.
yeah, so here's the thing is, like I said, we currently are working on biotech, and I think that is where most of the people in the molecular design space are working, especially with the COVID pandemic. That is where the resources are being allocated. So the main focus right now is on extreme targeting, controlling molecules, and people go for pharmaceutically optimal traits. But if you look at this year to date, over $1.5 billion has already been invested into molecular design for pharmaceuticals. And so that is the space that I'm in. But I have realized that we are getting to a point at which we have extreme control over very descriptive qualities of molecules, and we can define very custom tailored molecules well beyond anything that's ever been discovered. I mean, I don't personally do it yet in materials. We are designing it to have that as a feature in the future, but we do this for cancer genes all of the time. This is what we do. We will take something where there is a protein structure of a cancer cell, and we will design these custom molecules that have never been discovered, never in a database, and they're completely novel, and they will far exceed anything that anyone has ever discovered for binding with that. But in the same way, anything that you target at, it is a mathematical probabilities of atom by atom, what is the best atom I can add to build this molecule. And whatever you target at, it tends to beat everything people have currently discovered. Just, we, like I said, we have seen a very, very small fraction of the molecular space. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have tried this on a lot of different, metal alloys and all of these different chemical properties. But from what I've seen, both me and, there's just in the US alone, I know there's 100 AI companies working on in this general space. And throughout all of that, I mean, the science is there. We are starting to be able to have very extremely hand-tailored targeting of specific molecular qualities. So while I don't think the funding and the direction of the research has gone there based on, most of this became possible during the pandemic or right before, everything has been focused on medicine. But at the same time, I think that it being applied to other industries is something that has yet to be researched in depth, and I think it offers a lot of potential.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Finding affinity for biomolecules is one thing. Alloys and thermodynamic properties are a completely different thing, completely different math, completely different quantum mechanics. I mean, it's serious quantum mechanics. It's not just molecular mechanics and electrostatic potentials and the kinds of things that people do in biotech, as I understand it. But I hope you're right. So yeah, that would be wonderful if we get these things. We could certainly use them in space.
So, so this is a bit of levity, and it's slightly serious as well. We did finally invent transparent aluminum. Do you remember that from Star Trek? Where they come to Earth, they go back in time and come to Earth, and they, on a Macintosh, this was in the 80s, Scotty gives them the design for transparent aluminum in exchange for some resources or something like that. We finally managed to make it. We have transparent aluminum now.
What?
Exactly. I mean, imagine what would happen if someone from 100 years from now came back and told us the metals that we don't know about. Science keeps advancing. There's a lot of opportunity that we haven't even begun to tap yet.
Michael, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, Rose, you said we have transparent aluminum now. Can you clarify?
Yeah, literally, it's just Google it. It's 1 second. I'll actually send you the paper right now.
Okay,
It goes by the name of Alon. It's aluminum oxynitride.
So I was just gonna say that's here's the issue I take with that a little bit is something that I think a lot of people don't grasp is when we do research, generally it's not like people sitting in a lab mixing random things together and then they discover something by accident, although that does happen. Typically when we're like researching something, whether it's material science or biology or whatever, usually we know what the mechanisms that drive the property we're looking for are, and so we're trying to find something that kind of meets that requirement. So we're not just stumbling around in the dark, but we're really heading in a direction. And so that's kind of the issue I have with that sort of idea that we're going to magically happen upon some amazing thing that's way better than we thought was possible, because the reality is if you understand the physics of what's going on at the molecular level, we have a pretty good understanding of how things work. It's just a matter of typically refining things very subtly. So I won't rule out the possibility that we could come up with some really incredible materials. However, they definitely won't be metallic. I'm pretty sure, because it will probably come from something less obvious, which means like a very complicated polymer chain or something. Kind of like most organic structures or like very complex proteins or something. It's going to be something very inobvious.
I would like to jump in and ask a question, Michael. As we figure out the optimal molecular structure, do we regain anything? So if we are building a megastructure, do we regain anything from redistributing those molecules? I guess that's kind of my question, and I think others have kind of touched on it, which is the materials we take up as we redefine what the structures are, or the base. Like if you think about layers, outer coating, like you need some kind of protection, and as you go inwards, then you need structural bits. Is there any kind of recouping that we could have over a long distance travel or building a megastructure? That's kind of like, I'm in the sci-fi space, so this is totally like off base kind of to my question, but that's kind of the question is like, can we recoup any of that and then redistribute those materials? Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking. What do you mean by recoup? What are you trying to regain?
So if you have a structure, right? If you have a structure and you have an outer wall and an inner wall and a third wall, and by the third wall, there's a structure that creates for its density or for its weight, it can create a stronger barrier.
And then if you figure out an algorithm mid-flight that you can restructure that, can you temporarily break it down and rebuild it and then recoup that material?
Oh, so do you mean like reusing material that you already have with you?
Correct. And then so if the problem space then becomes like the structure and you have the same material, so whatever, you have 1,000 grams, but if you reorganize this material in a different fashion, can you recoup 200 grams of it or 150 grams of it over time, like just restructuring it? And then can you do that mid-flight? Can you have a reserve that can pull away and then put back in a stronger sense?
You're never going to get anything for free. So if you do use like recuperate material, like you said, it's going to be stuff that you already have. You're turning thing one into thing two, but you're never going to get any extra mass or energy out of the deal. And so it's kind of like recycling, right? We do recycling, but it's energy intensive.
That
And so
was kind of my question for structure. Like, can you change the structure and use less material and then gain something? And depending on what materials you have, maybe it's too late to mid-flight change it, but maybe you do recoup something. That was kind of it's very random.
You mean like stretch the same amount of material into like more purpose, like getting more out of the same amount of material because its structure is more optimal?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Then if there's layers of that material, so if your polymer is only on the inside that is structural, but you need some kind of barrier on the outside which is thinner, can you then recoup some of that thinner outer material, and then you reuse that somewhere along the way because you've refined the structure?
So this is kind of interesting because something we do see is that traditional launch vehicles, like rockets that launch from the Earth, their payloads experience a lot of acceleration forces and vibration and all that stuff. So they tend to be very structurally overbuilt. So in theory, if you could take whatever your satellite is made of, melt it down or something, and then turn it into the structure that you want once you're in zero gravity, that would be potentially advantageous. But regardless, it's you don't get anything for free, so it's going to be very power intensive.
Right.
Dennis, did you want to weigh in here?
Dennis?
Yes, 1 second. I just wanted to give a counterexample to the previous speaker who talked about small percentage of random discovery and lack of metal, breakthroughs in the metal. There was an interesting new development in the material science called high entropy alloys, and how they were discovered. The scientists didn't knew about that area, but they were studying literally the metal particles from the radioactive waste and discovered the mechanical properties were quite interesting. And then they tried to experiment literally mixing different batches of the metals in the ball mill and then sintering them, and they discovered entirely new ways of making metal alloys with amazing mechanical properties, literally orders of magnitude better than anything comparable. Now, of course, they only made like small samples, and these amazing properties start to break down. But there is an opportunity for those serendipitous discoveries of materials we couldn't even imagine before, but are actually possible. Like the mechanical properties of some of the samples were like literally beats any comparable industrial materials by at least 1 order of magnitude. Now there's hot new area in material science, but to put a bit of a cold water, where maybe decades or at least 30 years from using those materials in the real structures as they have been discovered, I think, in early 2000s. It's still, haven't made out of the lab. But this is how material science advances. There are a lot of potential breakthroughs, but they take incredibly long time to make it to the, industrial scale applications. And if you know the history of aluminum alloys, the ones we use today were discovered during the First and Second World War, and they're still being the dominant ones being used on the most modern airliners and aircrafts.
Thanks for clarifying on that, Dennis. Katerina, thanks for being so patient. You have the stage. Katerina?
Oh, hi. I'm just listening.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for being here. Robert, I believe you are next.
Thank you. Yeah, so Will, I wanted to ask, I work in semiconductor manufacturing, so also like nanoscale manufacturing and algorithms and stuff. I wanted to ask about any like specific experiences in taking a discovered molecule and scaling up the production of it, or how you would even imagine doing that for a materials-based thing as opposed to a pharmaceutical.
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge that that is an active area of something we are researching right now. And that will be one of the challenges. And I would definitely agree with Dennis in the fact that it would be several years to go from us designing it to us actually scale manufacturing it. However, I do know, for example, with us, we are working mainly on cancer and COVID medications, those types of things. And what we do is that we have the AI algorithm actually incentivized to make it simpler to synthesize. And so, while on one hand there is still its own complexity, it is still a novel molecule, um, it works extremely well at targeting both hitting all of the metrics that we need for the material, but at the same time staying cheap and very simplistic to synthesize. I think a very good example would be, AlphaGo's famous Smooth 37, where we were talking about earlier how we kind of understand the space, we get incremental improvements, but on the flip side, if you look at AlphaGo's Move 37, that's a great example of AI showing completely new approaches that we hadn't thought of. It might not be very complex. In AlphaGo, when that happened, it was a aggressive move that was unexpected. People didn't think it was a good idea. Now it is a famous play in the game of Go that is used worldwide in competitions. In the same manner, I think we definitely have the ability to learn approaches that we don't understand, find new ways to do things that might be simpler and yet still more effective that have just yet to be discovered.
Yeah, no, I totally buy into the effort. I was just trying to connect the discovery part to the, actual practical application part, because that's often one of the harder things, especially when you're working across scale boundaries, right? So if you're trying to control molecules or even smaller things, and then you're also trying to produce a lot of that material, that often creates issues.
Yeah, no, and I would love to hear any advice that you have on that, because like I said, that is an active area that we are focusing on, because to test one molecule and give it lab tests, it's about a $200,000 cost for one molecule to synthesize and lab test. So that's less of a big deal when you're working in the drug industry, but as we get into scaling things up, that is a very big factor that you have to consider, and that is why we target so heavily towards synthetic accessibility scores.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So I would say, my own expertise is pretty narrow, at least when it comes to this kind of stuff, because like the scale that we work at is very particular. And, but like you said, the machines, that do this kind of work are multi-million-dollar, extremely high precision machines. And it's a very slow, laborious tuning process. It's just, there's a whole bunch of practical engineering mojo that kind of goes into it. And yeah, anyway, it's no fun. But so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole though. I kind of want to, I don't have much specific knowledge about, space or any of the engineering concerns that go into it, but I do have some general engineering understanding. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to ask about, if there's like a short way to answer this, maybe some of the mods could help me. What are the constraints that push towards wanting a larger structure, and then the constraints that push back the other direction towards building multiple smaller structures, right? So I know in software, you have these competing constraints where it's like there's returns to scale to try and build these big monoliths, but then you have these error correction and iterative, design problems pushing back the other direction. So you end up building software as a service sorts of things and these modular things that talk to each other. And so I'm just curious, like, why would you want to build large in the first place?
That's a great question. Would anyone like to weigh in on that?
Okay, if no one else does, then I'm happy to go. So, but just if anyone else would like to weigh in, please do so.
Yeah, I would like to ask what y'all thoughts are on 3D printing everything from the molecular level all the way up to the macro level in buildings and something like that. What is the biggest building that one could create now using 3D printing, and what is the smallest molecule that you could make now with 3D printing? Let's hear some discussion on that. I'm really curious about that. Go ahead.
Oh,
I think we're far. I think that technology is a couple decades out, but I think that is 100% the future. That is the direction technology is going, and I think that will eventually be where science leads.
For the sake of argument,
Excuse me, guys. John, we actually have a PDR, like pull to refresh order. So, like, there are lots of folks who've been really patiently waiting to speak, and we'd like to get to everyone in a fair and transparent way. So, just to, as like no one else has pitched in, just to quickly answer your question, it's if you are trying to create quote unquote artificial gravity or just centripetal acceleration, um, the difference, the larger the structure is, the softer and the gentler the delta of the acceleration, where the force is produced between uh, the feet and the head will be, right? If it's small, you might get dizzy just if it's a short radius, you will get dizzy just standing up. If it's extremely big, it's that's much less of a problem. Um, the competing side, on the other hand, comes down to mass, and like making and everything like just like location is everything in real estate. When it comes to orbital structures, it gets back down to mass, and everything comes back down to those parameters. And every every kilogram you add, every gram you add, creates additional ramifications and complexity. So we have that particular aspect to it, because it would then negate one of the key factors that are related to this design. In fact, when they were actually proposing an Apollo Venus mission, when during the Apollo applications program, they had a really clever way to get around this. The way they were proposing was to use a tether, like do a long line between the counterweight and the place where the astronauts are, that could basically a command module, and then spinning it around the hub, kind of like spinning these two around, and that would like create this gentleness without building a massive structure.
Thank you very much for your insight on this. I got invited to another room, so I'm going to split now. Thank you very, very much for your insight. I appreciate that. Take care, y'all.
Thanks for being here. Ken, would you like to say anything?
Hi guys. No, thank you for letting me be a part of this. I've really been enjoying the discussion. So, I definitely have a few things to say. It's been going on a while, so I had a chance to actually write some stuff. So, first of all, I'm a government physicist. I've had a chance to be an AI advisor over at NASA Goddard's Heliophysics Lab. I feel like I have a very interesting perspective on this. First started off by following Dr. William Thronson's work for our Moon to Mars missions, which really started me getting into the point of wanting to build in space. Um, so the first thing that I would like to say is on someone talked about biomimicry, and I think that's going to be kind of really the direction to go to actually building these mega structures in space. I mean, we could look at something like a spider building a web. I mean, the web is considered a large structure compared to the spider. And if we have some sort of robotic platforms that are similar to, the spider, we can, easily build the web in a sense. Easily is, an understated word. A good while ago, I had a talk with Dr. Michael Summers, friend and astrobiologist, and we discussed the kind of platforms of robotic building large structures in space. And it really is going to be. I'm on the kind of the side of kind of a team robotic journey. where we have different robots that do different things. I recently was part of getting part of it's a new national initiative, like really new. We literally just created the name Aztec, and it's just with students in creating small like cube satellites. And a big proponent of what I'm trying to push is a CubeSat that kind of read other satellites, tell if they're dead, and kind of get on that where it can recycle the other Cube satellites, because we know more than 50% of them are don't make it and have no use for them, and starting to recycling what's actually in space. And there was a discussion earlier of basically a 3D printer in space. So we can start talking about groups of robots that can work together to recycle things in space to actually start working on these larger structures. It doesn't simply start with a CubeSat and a small printer, but with we add on to these groups of robots, we start having the ability to start building and weaving them the larger web-like structure. Now I heard the talk about maybe like 3, 7, 10, 20 years, and I couldn't tell you a timeline, but I do think this is something that's possible. And adding along the AI side, which is something I do probably too often now, is we can start looking at simulations of these things building something and start changing what they build in the simulation. I mean, easily you can simulate the spider building the web, but now we're looking at 6 different kinds of robots, you know hundreds, thousands, whatever quantity may be needed. I mean, we may be looking at 1,000 CubeSat, but maybe 2 larger Badger 289 excavator type robots to build these really Goliath structures in space. I mean, I heard we talked about the Enterprise. The Enterprise is massive. I mean, we're talking about a small city size thing here. And I think these are going to be the ways we actually can look forward to truly building it, and not only building it, but once these robots finish, they can move on to building the next larger structure. I would definitely love other people's thoughts and weighing in, but just to add, I truly believe that these robots would have to be full, at least to have an autonomy level 4, where a human would give them the task, and they would go part and complete the task as successfully as possible. I do believe there's kind of a standard of if it's in space and it's a space station and we want people to be in it, and oxygen to be in it, and we want a certain safety standard, this humans are going to have to be in the loop. I'm not sure if it's going to be like a checking procedure, but I don't want to get too far off, but I'm definitely interested in what people would think of the mega structures being built, like the spider web, the spider and its web.
Definitely. I think autonomous construction with advanced construction methods like what you mentioned, 3D printing, are going to be really important in allowing us to create these megastructures. I think we're quite a long way off from being able to create pressure vessels autonomously in space, but I think just due to the fact that we're going to have to do so much material processing, but I think it's definitely something that I would like to see happen. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this?
I would, real quick. Relativity Space is already 3D printing rockets. I don't think it would be too big of a stretch to do it in zero gravity. The other thing,
go ahead.
The other thing I'll throw out real quick. It sounded like Ken was suggesting that we would build things in orbit using like recycled CubeSats, for example. If I understood that correctly, I think that's absurd, because these things are in orbits that are at incredibly different energy states. And it would be like, I recently gave the analogy, it would be like driving a tanker truck all the way around the world every time you want to pick up a piece of trash, and then trying to build something out of that piece of trash. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but at that point, it's going to be much, much easier to bring things up from Earth with you.
No, I completely agree. I'm just trying to look at the kind of the economic costing of it. I mean, a CubeSat, something small, you probably wouldn't get that much out of it. But I mean, we had the talk of discussing of recycling the space station. This could be something that maybe a bigger trash pile to recycle instead of something as small as a CubeSat. And for more on the autonomy robots, I've been working on kind of a construction roper that I was presenting at JPL. It's completely prototype, but it's, I just go on what Michael said. I feel like we're at the point where we almost can build. Well, I had a discussion with somebody. We can build almost anything at this point, but it's, what can it truly do? What does the AI give it the ability, the capability to do? I mean, we can build robot arms, but when you walk in the door, are they able to scratch your back in knowing so? So I definitely think we can build it. We're getting to the point where we can kind of design the code structure and the autonomy of it to actually be able to complete some of these goals. Now, I do think the recycling space may be, it's. I'm just trying to think of the economic side of that situation, but I definitely think that even working on these mega structures where we have these groups of robotic platforms, I think that's going to probably be the most efficient way to go, the best way of kind of keeping humans out of the, at least keeping a lot of people in the way, not in the way of, life-threatening, solar winds in that kind of state. But no, that was it for me. I really appreciate everybody listening.
Yeah, thanks for being here. That was really a really interesting discussion. Nathan, would you like to say anything?
Hi, thanks for having me. I just kind of got excited when Frederic brought up the spider-like structures. That reminds me of a sailboat's mast, how it's really a rigid structure, but it's so lightweight and it gets most of its rigidity through the cables that are tensioned very tightly. And I think that's kind of an interesting concept that might translate well to space. But other than that, I don't have too much to say. I just got excited and came up. If anyone has any questions about generative design or like the AI, how it makes structures, and it also makes layouts for architecture. So it's not just about making physical structures, it's about just optimizing for any kind of inputs, just like where you put a machine and then where the next machine in the process goes, and how the flow of the building or the structure works. Yeah, if anyone has questions about that, feel free to ask.
Yeah, that's super cool. Would anyone like to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, that actually blends into the reason I raised my hand. Since I'm the next in order, I believe. I think I'll just go into it if that's okay.
Yeah, all good. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name is Salim Khan. I'm a career journalist, and I've launched and led technology news units for international and national organizations. And so, just before the pandemic, I came up on stage because when the discussion of AI to build structures came up, because before the pandemic, I was spending some time meeting with and talking to AI researchers and people applying this technology in construction and structure design. And one of the people I spoke to, I spent an afternoon, most of the day really, with Mike Haley, who's the vice president of research at Autodesk and who leads their machine intelligence group. And so one of the interesting things that he showed me was sort of the process and how they're thinking about and working on building and designing structures using generative design. So there was a question of what these structures would look like, and if the existing sort of body of work is any indication, my sense is that initially some of these structures will resemble things that already exist, because the machine learning algorithms are obviously basing off of what the existing sort of library of structures and components and materials. But then you get into an interesting kind of in-between state when you start letting the AIs do their thing. And if you kind of let them off the leash, what you end up with is some really bizarre and alien and even creepy looking designs. Because they tend to optimize for efficiency. So what they've ended up doing is having a human in the loop and moderating the design process. And so it comes back, gets pulled back a little to something that humans feel comfortable with. One of the also interesting aspects is the notion of having dynamic structures, and dynamic in the sense that they're constantly changing. Some of the research they're doing is around having sensor embedded structures, and in space, I imagine you're going to have lots of sensors in the structures that are built. But part of the reason for the sensors in there is to optimize. So you would have these sensors constantly feeding data about what's going on, the loads on the structure, other sort of maybe radiation, other factors, and then you have robotic arms that would constantly be constructing and redesigning, really in conjunction with the AIs, the construction AIs, to optimize for changing conditions as more and more data comes through. So eventually, one can imagine that as people and the technology advances, and as people become more and more accustomed to seeing structures and items that are built through generative design, that you're going to start seeing things that do look more alien, maybe resemble things that are insectoid, get some aspects of biomimicry in there. And obviously in space, since it's 0G, you're going to have probably some novel structures. So I just thought I'd add that, just based on what I've seen so far, and hopefully that's a useful contribution. Thanks for listening.
No, definitely. That's super useful. I love everything you just said. I think creating dynamic structures is going to be so important to both optimize the limited space that's going to be inherently a part of space architecture, as well as to avoid monotony, which is going to be a really significant psychological problem for astronauts in these long duration missions. And I think also for what you said in terms of creating these very alien forms, I think in space we're going to have to forgo our thoughts of what architecture should look like, because ultimately architecture is shaped by the environment for which it is meant to protect us from. And with such a different environment, it's going to be inherently going to look super different. But I think we need to stop looking at that as such a bad thing and more of as an opportunity. So yeah, I really love everything you just said there. Drew, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that both what Salim said and Ken kind of fits into the same question. I feel like I'm double dipping a little bit, so I'm going to be very quick in that. That was kind of my question. If you have a mission and you have to build a structure to get out of orbit, you have to break the atmosphere. That has one requirement. Once you're in deep space, that has a different requirement. Can you reconfigure those materials in some fashion? And then once you re-enter a new atmosphere, maybe it's different. Then once you build those structures, I'm approaching this kind of problem space from science fiction because I work in video games and we create worlds on unknown planets, and that's kind of where I'm bringing it. My questions from is the reclamation of material to then reconstruct what you need, and how the structures change. And that was kind of to my original question, is as the algorithms perfect proficiency, can you reclaim any of that material? And then the final structure, what materials would you take to then build a megastructure? So if you're going to build a megastructure just orbiting the Earth, or if you had to build it in Mars, that megastructure might be made of different materials and have a different structure. So that was kind of my question, but I feel like multiple people have touched on this topic, which is what is the materials to succeed in your mission and then be the most efficient. I think the efficiency part changes over time, so the structure changes over time. So what is the plan for out
Well, I
the
would probably
exoskeleton
bring
part
data.
and the inner part?
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Shane.
Oh, I was just say I'd probably bring potatoes. I'd probably bring embryos of some sort, probably fish and chickens, maybe a few.
We can't
Uh,
hear you, Shane.
okay, I'll be peaceful. I honestly, I would bring food and quality people and those who know how to persevere. Honestly, I'd bring a drag queen or two, at least two.
Okay, so true. I feel like I'm having a hard time visualizing what you're proposing. Uh, could you like give me an example of the kind of fictional world and the efficiencies that you're talking about? So are you talking about like trying to create a closed loop system where everything comes from everything else and everything has a history? Like, let's say there was a war or something, and then they reuse the materials from the I don't know, the ships, the satellites used for orbital bombardment in that war to create a new station, and that station then had something happen, to mutiny or something, but people died. Then that was reclaimed into something else. Are you talking about some a world like that?
Sorry, no. I'm speaking like a mission. Like if your mission is to exit orbit, you have to get through the atmosphere. Now you're in deep space. There's less material that you need, different structures, and you re-enter a different orbit. What are the materials you regain during the non-crucial part? So what is the structural change? So, or if we say that we figure out a new pattern to create a stronger structure, you could regain some of that material. And then what could you use that material for mid-flight? And then once you start to re-enter,
That's way too open-ended. What are you fishing for?
Oh, sorry for that.
Sorry. No, you. It sounds like you have something in mind. What are you imagining? What are you describing to us in the form of a question?
yeah, my base question like was basically on the prompt, which is like megastructures, and the megastructures I think within orbit are different than on the planet. And if you had to exit our atmosphere, go into space, build a megastructure, or build a megastructure on some other planet, I think the things that you would learn or the materials that you would need would be different, and the structural architecture would be different over time. If that makes any sense at all.
I mean, all
Totally.
of the architecture is going to be different because on Earth we design for movement that is the movement on Earth, the way we move here is completely dictated by gravity. And so in a microgravity environment, the movement is entirely different. And so we have to design to accommodate that.
Have you?
Right.
Sorry for that.
Sorry, go ahead, Rose.
Have you ever played Kerbal Space Program?
Sorry, ask your question again.
Oh, have you ever played Kerbal Space Program?
Oh yes, of course.
Have you ever tried Realism Overhaul and those mod packs, including Principia?
No, that game has so many options. The simulation is very deep, so I have not explored all avenues of that. But that's kind of where my questions are coming. They're more from the science fiction actually than the hard sciences. So I apologize.
No,
And
no,
I
no.
already had a question answered on the forum, so if we want to just move along, you can skip me as well.
Yeah, no, no, not at all. I think this is interesting to explore because it's something I'm having a hard time to relate to, but it's really an interesting concept. The reason why I'm saying that is some of the mods actually do delve into this kind of um, reuse, recycling, transformative aspects of it, and they try to introduce materials and material economies into the simulation. If you DM me, I'd happily send over like a mod list that you could try around to get an intuitive feel of the system that you might want to make. If that makes any sense.
It does. It does. I actually don't want to make a system. I'm just curious about the implications of what I'm asking. So, if we were to build a structure on some off planet place, what would those materials be? How would you construct those materials, and what would the shape of them be? And then how much of that material would you have to take to build outright, and how much could you reclaim over your distance of travel to just re-enter atmosphere, assuming that it's different than like what we have here on Earth, if that
Maybe,
makes sense.
maybe are you talking about, say, under some environment conditions, the structure and the, let's say, composition of the material may be different under that environment. Let's say, for example, if you a vehicle that have to sustain re-entry heat, you have to have the heat shield to absorb and reflect the heat. And then let's say, for example, you have just for example, if your vehicle is not only have to, let's say, go in from the outer space into an atmosphere, but also go down to the ocean. Suppose that we are visiting a planet that similar to the Earth, and you going down the ocean, which is has high pressure, and then the vehicle has to sustain the high pressure and then resist the high pressure. Then the structure and the geometry has to be different. To sustain the pressure instead of high temperature, and or let's say if the vehicle is going through the close to the sun, going through the close to the sun, and then you have to not resist the shield away from the sun solar wind, which is high energy electron, and also if you go towards the outer space, go away from the solar system, that you have to sustain the shield from the cosmic ray, and you have to have material to shield that. Is that what you're talking about? That
Yeah, 100. Yeah, Hanson, that's 100% what I'm talking about. So each mission will be different, and what materials you bring, and how you employ those materials, and then how you transform those materials during your travel. Maybe to get out of Earth's atmosphere, you can reclaim some of those materials, and then you can reuse them in another way. So that's
I
100% what
think
I'm
I think
talking about.
it's not. Yeah, I mean, I think probably the reclaim the word reclaim is a little bit confusing. I would say that reconstitute the material. Let's say the shield the heat shield could be, I don't know, you can maybe molecularly reconstitute it, either through chemical process or physical process, to reconstitute the molecular structure or the geometric shape. Um, and it seems like reclaim is something that, like a recycling or something, that the it's a trash. It used to be a trash, and then you retrieve it and then use it for something else. I think it's a little bit confusing that way, but I think, yeah, I mean, just a suggestion that reconstitute would maybe a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you can go, Drew.
I was just gonna say that I think my naivety is coming through here, actually, in the hard science part of how you would reconstitute. So yeah, recycling, there's gonna be some loss, but if you don't need this material during this section, and if your reentry also doesn't need this shield, how could you reuse it once you've landed, I guess? Or what is the structure? If we figured out a different structure to 3D print, for instance, and it is AI driven, it uses 10% less material. That is also what I'm saying, to recapture some of that material. So the best known, and these missions are very long, right? Like they take a long time to solve, and you have to make your best guess today. They change potentially. Like you still have to plan for best case scenario. Then once you land, what materials do you have, and what don't you need anymore? What could you then, I guess, recycle would probably be a better word to reestablish your megastructure on the planet side on Mars, for instance. And then what would that look like? Would that change over time? Or would it be like you have your best guess and you take all the materials and then you print the thing once you arrive at the location? Or could you adjust that plan uh, through the journey, continuing the algorithm? Oh, they found a more efficient way. So have we recaptured 10% more material once we land? That's kind of what I was speaking to. So sorry.
I would think that's possible. I mean, like definitely those they would take energy, but along the way, I suppose that if you're going close to the solar, to a sun, are we talking about interplanetary or kind of solar, intersolar travel, or even intergalactic? I suppose that we can always, use the collect energy, like if we are getting close to a sun, to a solar system, and then that will collect energy, and then of course the fission energy that of course, I mean, yeah, so to do those to perform those reconstitutions, um, and of course we can always mine the asteroids, and the planet that we bypass, uh, and then yeah, but definitely it will cost energy to do all of these.
Hansen's totally right here. You could deconstruct your spacecraft on the surface of Mars and then turn it into something else. Like, for example, if you land with a starship, you could melt down your starship and then build steel houses with it. But firstly, it'd be a lot easier to use your starship as is, even if it's suboptimal. Because, it's one of those things where if your thing is, let's say, 25% suboptimal, is it easier to use it as is or to completely start over and rebuild the thing? So that's just something to think about. And then the other thing, like Hansen said, is if you can find locally sourced materials that are already like, iron or something else that's useful in relatively concentrated forms, that might be easier than deconstructing whatever you're trying to.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I was applying kind of the process to game development, which is where I'm from, which is like we build the airplane as we fly it, and then before we land it, we have to like build the landing gear. So that was kind of like technology that maybe doesn't exist when we start, but we develop it right before we land. How much can we? What is the cost of that, and how do we successfully land it? And now we're surface, and then how do we take the airplane, deconstruct it, and then build the megastructure?
You should look up the company Made in Space because they're actually doing some work that's relatively along those lines. For example, they have a satellite that's going to launch with its solar panels rolled up, and then it has an onboard 3D printer that it's going to use to 3D print the structure that like extends the solar panels out to the sides. So this really small spacecraft can have these very large solar panels, but launch with a very compact form factor. So you should look up the company Made in Space.
Thank you so much. I'm definitely gonna look them up. And then my last question would be like, is that exciting? Like, is that practical?
I just find involving game development in the space industry extremely exciting, just given the fun fact how hard SpaceX was trying to recruit the people that worked on the physics engine for Unreal Tournament and for Havoc. Elon was personally trying to recruit those people because if you can make it work in a simulation, it'll look the same in real life too. So I'm just excited about that in general.
That's a lot of where my questions are coming from, because we'll sit in meetings and talk about this stuff. So that's actually I'm just kind of rubbing elbows with you all, trying to have those same conversations about what is possible, maybe not. But yeah, I've worked with a lot of NASA PhD scientists just on simulation for silly video games.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'll quickly just reset the room as we've been going for just about 3 hours now. We're discussing orbital megastructures, and if you haven't already, please be sure to join the club by hitting the greenhouse at the top. If you'd like to join the conversation, please raise your hand and come to the stage, but please just have your bio filled out so that we know you're not a troll. And with that, Fahad, you've been very patient. You have the floor.
The fill. So there are things that we can.
Go for it.
So I think the two things I thought of it. So basically, one thing that is kind of a very simpler, in a simpler form, would be bringing the material that is already manufactured on the Earth, and then put it in like a 3D structure. But you can basically put the printed. So one structure would be like origami structure. Basically, this is a kind of a planar structure, but when you in most kind of put it together, it could extend to a larger area, and then also give a shape. But it's you can fold it up when you transport it, and it's a planar structure. So basically, an origami structure is kind of art for paper folding art. And then also there is, I think, kind of a memory, not memory, a self-replicating material. I think the kind of a nanostructure. I think I read a paper about that, but I have to look it up, the specific paper. So yeah, that's the Fazat. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting.
Fahad.
If you find the paper at any point, please just tweet it out to the club and they'll retweet it so that everyone can read what you mentioned.
Sure. Thank you. It's a Fahad, sorry.
Mengdi, would you like to say anything? Mengdi? If not, she may be away from her phone right now. So, Trey, would you like to go?
Yes, perfect. I've been sitting here waiting for my time to shine. So, my main question is about the hypothetical Dyson sphere, right? Would it be more beneficial to build one of those things where you consider the actual like scale of it, since we're talking about a megastructure with, trying to make enough solar panels to cover like, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 million miles away from the sun? Or would it just be better for us to use like our own nuclear power to do the same thing on a smaller scale?
Well, if I may go here briefly, the amount of mass and matter that would be needed to build a Dyson sphere, at least in our solar system, is absolutely insane. Like, we would have to take apart all of the rocky planets and some of the gas giants in order to do so, and that would be doing it, that it wouldn't be a very thick structure at all. So I think it wouldn't be, at least not within the next probably several hundred years, not really feasible to do it here, but perhaps in a different solar system. If anyone else would like to weigh in there, feel free.
Well, then are there also are there also partial options where it kind of like rotates around and then we collect a battery and then send another one up there to get charged?
Yeah, there are, similar to the Dyson sphere, there are concepts of like Dyson rings. I believe that's what they're called. I'll check quickly. but like rings where it's you just have like a ring of habitats instead of building an entire like sphere. So that would be still harnessing a lot of energy.
Yeah, also the sphere itself is more like a swarm, that's in sort of in the shape of the sphere. But yeah, I don't know the exact calculations that people have done on it, but it kind of looks like the sun is our biggest nuclear reactor that that we have. So I don't know. Maybe we would be able to find enough helium-3 or whatever to power enough fusion reactors. So, but I feel like yeah, I don't know. I would have to look at like what exact calculations are they for all the Kardashev stuff.
I don't think it would ever be financially feasible. Even if we had the materials to do something like that, it would probably cost more than it would ever output. We'd be better off trying to make our own fusion reactors.
Yeah, definitely, especially because a lot of it wouldn't be habitable, at least if we wanted it to be to create artificial 1G, the Dyson sphere. Only the like equatorial areas of it would be able to do so. So I think it's not super feasible.
So I have a comment on that exact thing, the subject of gravity with such a structure. If you were to deconstruct the planetary bodies of the entire solar system, which is a fearsome thing to think about, if you were to somehow do that and concentrate it in a ring around the sun, what would the gravitational properties be like? So with the center of gravity would be about coincident with the sun. So would gravity point upward, or would the local gravity pull you towards the ring? And then how much gravity would there be? And I'm sure you can calculate all this, but I think it's interesting to think about philosophically how you would handle that. Obviously, you could also do this whole centrifugal force thing, but just from a gravitational perspective, because you're dealing with planetary scales of stuff.
I think I'm missing it.
The thing in detail, but I think sorry. Did you guys hear the? Is it noise here?
The roof.
Yeah.
The roof. The roof
You
is
getting
on
arrested,
fire.
Siren? Is it siren? Yeah, they're coming for me. I'm divulging the secret.
Yeah, it sounded better towards the end, so if you want to try again, feel free. Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
So it's all the solar sails. So each supposedly the sheets very gossamer sheets membrane, and then so basically face the surface towards the sun, and then the gravity and the solar wind and the photon energy pressure, basically the radioactive pressure would be in balance, and then also it's moving around the sun as rotating around orbiting around the sun. So there's basically the gravitational force would be in counterbalance with the centripetal. The gravitation provides the centripetal force, pedal force, and then also the solar wind, solar radiation pressure. So that's what it will sustain the suspended, or you can say, space. So yeah.
Well, assuming you don't have any like symmetry breaking like fluctuations in solar wind, I guess, right? Which could cause some like maybe minor destabilization.
Sure. You can. Yeah, elliptic satellites with the kind of a rocket opens, and you can push it to higher orbit. It's possible that if it goes too much fluctuation, then it goes towards the sun, right? But I suppose that the ring is not going to be strategically placed, and then you can also, the way how you get the membranes for the sail to that position, supposedly will to put it there. So you might as well use control it to stabilize the orbit. If it gets too low, you put it back into the kind of a dynamic control.
That's super interesting. I'll definitely have to look more into that. Just quickly, we're going to start to wrap up the room, so if you would like to come up to the stage, please raise your hand now, and I'll turn off hand raising in a few minutes. But with that, Mengdi, you've been on stage for a while. Would you like to say anything? Alrighty, she appears to be away from her phone, so Alex, you have the stage.
Well, hey, I've been really enjoying the conversation, and I think I was drawn back to the part of the conversation that I think Salim was going, and then Nathan, and then to some degree Drew, which was the idea about how we go about designing some of these structures. And I was reminded by some early work back in, say, the late 90s around genetic algorithms and using genetic algorithms as a way to be able to optimize physical structures, optimizing around certain problem spaces, such as, for example, aerodynamics, right? So you could take the plane of a wing and you would have a whole bunch of engineers, hundreds, maybe thousands across Boeing and Airbus and Lockheed and all the rest of it, and then applying a completely different approach, which is to say, hey, let's just allow the algorithms to figure out using genetic algorithms to figure out an optimal shape. In today's age, now we would naturally, I think, go towards AI, machine learning, and those kinds of approaches to be able to figure out, let's say, generative approaches to those problems with some direction, moderation, the word I think was used at some point by humans to kind of like push the algorithms and the solutions toward maybe a certain direction or tune it. And I was also struck in that part of the conversation around even the notion of aesthetics as a consideration. I think I can't remember who it was, so forgive me. Maybe it might be you, Caroline, or somebody else. Like, well, let's just imagine, like, here we are on these structures, living not just a lifetime, but maybe generations of lifetimes, and like, what would you need to do to like create cognitively interesting spaces that don't look like the Borg and cubes that are thoroughly, potentially incredibly efficient, but utterly dull and soul destroying. If you PTR, I've done a couple of examples of the kind of shapes that you can generate through these approaches, and they look weirdly organic. Somebody said almost like insects. Anyway, I keep rambling on, but I love this conversation because I think that there are so many things to consider and so many potential approaches depending on the problem and the optimization that you're trying to solve for, that I do wonder when we might go back to genetic algorithms and a blend of these different techniques to solve for quite different problems simultaneously.
I think genetic algorithm is still in use, quite even in AI.
I'm sorry. I think one of you guys has your mic on and isn't speaking. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So I'm saying that genetic algorithm is still in quite wide use. Even in the deep learning neural nets when they do the optimization, looking for the minimal minimal points.
You know, I don't know if genetic algorithms were used in the design, but if you take a look at the design for the Boom supersonic jets and compare them to the original Concorde design, I mean, which is a more than 50-year-old design, they're actually quite similar. And so it either speaks to the great engineering capability and design capabilities of the original engineers of the Concorde. And really, without all this, advanced high-powered computing, they're able to create a design that's still, to this day, relatively current. If the Boom supersonic jets are any indication, whether that translates to spatial or space structures is certainly another question. But I thought that was an interesting example to look at.
And so I would also say AI is not scary, uh, uh, especially if you put good people behind it, a positive team, people that actually want to help people. AI is what you teach it to do. And I think there's a lot of people who are becoming extremely aware of that. But we've been ahead of it for more than several steps. And so, I mean, I would just say be nice to your artificial assistants.
Fantastic. I think I definitely need to maybe rethink the way I talk to Siri. Max, you have the stage. Max, if you're away from your phone, Rick, you can go next.
Hey, okay. So I was just thinking maybe if we take a step back here, think about a few megastructures that might be created, say, in the next 50 to 100 years. So maybe just something to think about. I know people have probably proposed these types of ideas. So let's imagine a very simple structure, a structure that, say, just blocks sunlight, right? So the idea being if you flew up a bunch of 5-micron thin silicon wafers, maybe I don't know, 10 centimeters diameter, little discs, and put them at the Lagrange point, L1 Lagrange point between the Earth and the Sun. So that's where the gravity is, the gravitational pull is effectively zero between the Earth and the Sun. Perhaps that kind of structure, if you brought up, I forget exactly how much is needed, but let's say hundreds of thousands of these little very thin wafer discs, and use that to attenuate the incident light on the Earth. Perhaps you could actually help steer certain types of climate change things that are going on, right? So people have proposed some of these ideas. So I'm just throwing it out there because I think it's kind of interesting. Whether or not it would work for our current climate problems, I can't say for certain, but I just think it's attainable, and even by launching rockets, which we always wonder, you're launching rockets, you're spending a lot of at the moment fossil fuels, but maybe we'll minimize that, or things that are generated from fossil fuels. We could actually use these kinds of structures for immediate benefit for humanity at large. Anyways, just a thought, and I think this room has been really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great thought. We actually spent some time discussing that last week, but if you follow Jim Green on here, he's bound to talk about it again at some point. But we did discuss how we could both solve climate change here on Earth by placing some giant megastructure to block some of the sun's rays, as well as using that concept to terraform Mars and Venus in different ways. Obviously, we would have to block the sun from Venus and intensify it for Mars, but it's definitely a really interesting application of megastructures. James, would you like to go? Hanson, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, just quickly. It's in the same spirit as the Dyson sphere.
Yeah, definitely. James, did you want to go?
Hi, yeah, sure. So, Caroline, I'm actually in architecture and design as well. My base is not so much into futurism, but I am looking into doing a project which relates directly to what we're talking about here, and that's how architecture can play a role in the future of space travel. And because this is a conversation more about megastructures, I just wanted to add some of the insights that I've learned that could possibly lead us there in the future. And that's that architecture is at a stage where we're considering modularity much more intensely now, and we're considering how spaces are essentially pods with performativity for human functions. So if we talk about how a space is a container, what we're trying to do with that container is retain sensitivity within that environment. So that would be the human occupancy space. But for technology, we would need to be also housing highly sensitive equipment, because obviously if we're doing these types of missions where we're needing to have extremely high performance modules, whether they're in a Dyson's shroud, in the sense that you've got like modules that circulate the sun, or modules which arrive at a planet like Venus and then mine the iron core to have the resources to produce grand, interstellar structures. So all of this comes down to the sort of layering that architecture can consider in terms of the sensitivity levels from the inner to the outer, and then how those apparatuses then reach out beyond the perimeters. So I'm probably just rambling, but I do think, if we as architects can start thinking about the gradient between the inner and the outer, those sort of temporal phases as well, from Earth to the atmosphere to then space, how can those modules transition? How can the stages be repurposed? How can we limit the number of waste outputs that architecture provides? And then we can probably start to actually think, okay, then what is the technology that goes along with these structures? Because there's the dumb and the smart structure. There's the dumb structure, which is the sort of planar paneling, and then there's the technical silicon sort of sensitive structures that then program the operable features. So I think, if we as, designers or game designers, as architects, as engineers, physicists, start to work together to look at how we can create modules that then form these functional elements, then we won't really have much of a problem actually reaching goals in set timeframes and then optimizing those goals to then reach the ambitions that humans have. So that's me. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. I think architecture has such an opportunity to play a huge role here in enabling us to make this transition into interplanetary life. It's just such an exciting time to be part of this field. And thanks for contributing to the discussion. Hope to see you around in the future, because we do this room every week. Drew, did you want to respond to that, or were you just clapping?
I was just clapping, yeah, totally. Like, I think he more eloquently put kind of the ideas that I was trying to get information on. So yeah, I was just clapping.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here and joining in on this discussion. With that, we will wrap up the room. We've been going for over 3 hours now, and I've had so many people in here. It's been really exciting. So unless anyone has any final words that they would like to say, we'll commence with the traditional countdown, which gives everyone time to both join the club for every week there are rooms like this. This room itself is a weekly room, and there are plenty of other rooms on building a city on Mars, sci-fi, just really anything related to space that you could be interested in, and to follow any of the speakers that you listened to tonight and were interested in what they said. There's so many really amazing people here who help make this club as great as it is, and everyone deserves to follow, and hope to see you guys next week. So with that, I'll close the room in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5,
Shane, what happened to the music?
4.
4,
Next time.
3, 2,
Already, yeah.
1.
blast off.
Good
Blast
night,
off.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.